Okay, we're going to be continuing this evening in the book, The Devil Worship, The Shocking Facts. And if you remember last week, we're kind of finishing up, as we finished up last week, with the primitive cycle, the cycle of this primitive worship. And if you remember what was covered, the cycle of primitive worship, it really centered around agricultural. It centers around the seasons, the summer, the spring, the winter, the fall, and the different things that the primitive mankind believed, believed what was taking place at that time, and this is why that they worshipped and did certain of these things. This is really explained very well in the book called Deception Concerning Yahweh's Calendar of Events. It's an excellent book, and I would recommend if you haven't read it, please get it and go over it and read it, because it explains these things in a great amount of detail. One of the things that was being talked about toward the end of last week, of course there were some traditions concerning Christmas and Easter and then Halloween, and it was mentioned last week. Remember that Halloween is probably one of the biggest money makers that's in the that there is today. I mean, people spend a huge amount of money on Halloween, and the one thing that sticks in my mind about that, one of the big traditions that they have for Halloween is children wearing costumes, and adults. Sometimes adults get into this too. Adults wearing costumes, and they go from door to door, and with the ritual known as trick or treat. And I know some of you older men, have probably seen that. We've seen it. You young men, Yahweh willing, you haven't seen that. You haven't had the displeasure of experiencing that. But it was a ritual known as trick or treat, and the whole idea behind that trick or treat was, if you would walk up to a house and you would go up to the individual and you'd tell them the words trick or treat. And if they did not give you what you wanted, in that instance, which was candy, then if they didn't give you what you want, then the owner of the house or the owner of their property risked having a trick played on them. And the world treats these things as harmless fun for children. But do you know what the children are actually being taught when they're told to go out and do that? They're actually taught and being taught to go out and commit an offense. Even in the world today, they have an offense called this. It's called extortion. You give me what I want, or else I'm going to do this. You're going to suffer the consequences if I don't get what I want. And that is what is being taught to the children in this little harmless thing known as trick or treat. Probably didn't even think about that, but when you look at it, when you look at the evil that is behind it, and the subtle teachings, and this is what we see here with the subtleness of this devil worship, in it's so evil and it's so subtle. And praise Yahweh that we have a teacher that is bringing this out for us so that we can root all of these things out of our lives. Now, one of the things that were talked about last week, as we were finishing up, was a cycle of primitive worship. And I've actually got, flip that over here. I actually have, maybe, if technology will work here, is something here that I drew up at one time, and it's just a cycle that it just shows this overall cycle of this worship. And of course, this cycle is all based on the summer solstices and the winter solstices and the equinoxes, as we'll see. This is not how Yahweh tells us to set the feasts, as we'll get into here in just a little bit. But what this shows here, it just shows at the winter solstice, you have the birth of the sun god. And if you think about what's taking place at the winter time, the winter solstice, that is the shortest period of daylight. So once you pass that shortest period of daylight, what starts taking place? Well, the day starts getting longer, right? We start getting more and more daylight. Well, this is the in the minds of the primitive people. Oh, the sun is being reborn. So we see this here. This goes along the lines of the birth of the sun god, and of course that took place around December 25th, January 6th in one calendar, December 25th in the other, and of course we know 40 days after the birth of a male child, according to the law of Yahweh, the mother or the woman is actually clean again from that childbirth. It's 40 days for a male child and 80 days for a female. Well, lo and behold, as we covered last week, 40 days after that is Valentine's Day. Okay, and if you take a look and you go back through the booklets and stuff that we have back over here on these pagan holidays, they explain all of these things. And you show that this here is it's a fertility rite that takes place on that day. And then you have the vernal equinox, which is the equal periods of daylight and of day and night. And this is actually what they use to set their day, their holiday known as Easter. And we're going to be covering Easter pretty extensively this evening. So you have those equal periods of day and night, and then it progresses on to the summer solstice, which is the longest period of daylight. And then after that, of course, the days start getting longer, and they start. It gets down toward the autumn equinox, which is again the equal periods of light and day. This is when the vegetation starts to die, and this is where the mother goddess is actually mourning the death of the father god and longs for the rebirth of the sun god. And there you have equal periods of day and night, and then we're right back to where we began in that cycle of worship. So it's just that cycle that continues over and over and over every year. And we're going to be getting, again, as we progress in this chapter, if you go back through that book on deception concerning Yahweh's calendar of events, it explains it in detail there. We're going to be going at it in detail through here as well over the next several weeks. But the Christian celebration of Easter, so we'll be here on right around page 112, 113, I think is where we left off. And Pastor writes here, and just to kind of just completely recap here, Easter does not come from the Scriptures, Pastor shows. This pagan custom has another source, as we have read. There was a transformation of the Jewish feast into Easter. And remember that transformation, the word transformed means to give a different form or appearance to. That means to change the character, nature, or condition of. Okay, but notice it's to change the character. It changes the character of this. And then transformation also means any change, the act of transforming or the state of being transformed. Now, how was this transformation take place? How was this transformation accomplished in the religion called Christianity? Well, it was done through the Council of Nicaea. But it shows here the Christian year. Let me see here. It says the Christian year, the early Christians who were mainly Jews, early Christians here it says who were mainly Jews were used not only to keeping one day a week as separate, but also marking the year with certain religious festivals, notably Passover, Tabernacles, and Pentecost. Okay, Tabernacles, Passover, and Pentecost, the three feasts that we're commanded to go to Yahweh's house. Those are the three feasts that we're commanded to appear before Yahweh at the place that He has chosen to establish His name. Okay, so remember, it's those things, it's these feast days, it's keeping these Sabbaths that sets us apart. It marks us as belonging to Yahweh. And we're going to see the hatred here that Satan has for this, and you'll begin to understand why these things were completely transformed and changed. And it says, this was held at, let's see, from early times, Christians kept a commemoration, it says here, of Christ's resurrection. This was held at Passover time and was finally fixed on the Sunday following Passover. Pentecost was then celebrated at the appropriate time. 50 days between the two were days of joy and rejoicing. The choice of December 25th in the east and 6th, in the east was 6th of January 6th for the birth of Christ is almost certainly because that day was a great pagan day honoring the sun. And in Rome, in the 4th century, it was transformed into a Christian festival. The 4th century, what does that translate to in roughly years? The 4th century is sometime during the 300s, right? Would have been the 300s. So sometime during the 300s that this was transformed. But what event took place in about a quarter of the way through the 300s, around 325 CE? Praise Yahweh, the Council of Nicaea. So we're seeing how all this ties in together here. It says the answer to these questions lies in the early history of Christianity, specifically at the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, when Constantine the Great helped to formulate Christian doctrine. And that is what the whole purpose of that was. When Constantine the Great, the only man in history who was extolled both as a Christian saint and a pagan god, presided over the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, his main objective was political: how to merge religion and politics efficiency. And that was a quote with, I believe, Malachi Martin, if I remember correctly. Malachi Martin, in the book, The Keys of This Blood, he made the comment. He said, religion without politics is not religion, and politics, it was something about you had to have a mixture. There was a mixture of politics and religion. And I don't remember the quote exactly. But basically what he was saying is you can't have one without the other. And it says, since there were more politically powerful pagans than there were politically powerful believers, the celebrations that pagans were accustomed to observing were the celebrations which were accepted at the time, or at the same time, the celebration of the Jews were rejected. So what you saw was, because there were more pagans around and you didn't have the believers were being pushed out and were being killed and persecuted. The celebrations of the Jews, it says, which is technically the laws of Yahweh, is really what it winds up being. It really winds up being the laws of Yahweh. The laws of Yahweh were rejected. And we see this here in reading from Funk and Wagnall's Standard Reference Encyclopedia, 1962. It says, an important historical result of the difference was that the Christian churches in the East were closer to the birthplace of the new religion, in which old traditions were strong, observed Easter according to the date of the Passover festival, while the churches of the West, whose communicants were descendants of the Greco-Roman civilization, celebrated Easter on a Sunday. The settlement of this difference was one of the objects of the Roman Emperor Constantine in convoking in 325 the Council of Nicaea. Okay, at the Council of Nicaea, it was decided that Easter should be celebrated in accordance with the Alexandrian computation, and we're going to get to that here the next page over. But the Council of Nicaea here, a little bit of history on that. It says the first ecumenical in AD 325, convoked by Constantine, condemned Arianism, which was essentially a denial of the divine nature of the Word, and so of the Son of God, Christ. Okay. Basically what that winds up saying is, with Arianism, if you remember what Arianism from the book that we just got done reading, Did Yahshua Messiah Pre-Exist? Remember, it went through all of the ancient philosophies and how those were all combined into Christianity and how they all came about. Well, Arianism was one of those. And Arius was a priest of Alexandria, Egypt. You remember the role Alexandria, Egypt played in the development of religion. And this priest, Arian, affirmed the created finite nature of Christ, it says. And basically what he was saying is that the Messiah did not pre-exist. He said the Messiah did not pre-exist. He stood up against the doctrine of the Trinity, and this is again what was pushed here in the Council of Nicaea. But this was Arian, or this Arianism, or this priest Arian, and his teachings were denounced by Constantine at the Council of Nicaea, and he was actually declared a heretic. He was actually declared a heretic when he opposed the doctrine of the Trinity. Now, the council defined the doctrine that the Son is consubstantial. Consubstantial means of the same essence. One and the same. With the Father. In other words, the Father and the Son are one and the same. And that's part of the doctrine of the duality, or part of the doctrine of the Trinity. It says, in drawing up the formula, leading parts were taken by Saint Anthemius and Hosius Bishop, and the latter probably presided. The council promulgated the famous Nicene Creed form. It also decided that Easter should henceforth be celebrated everywhere at the same time in accordance with the Alexandrian computation. So there was the Nicene Creed, which is recited I know it's recited in the Catholic Church, and if I remember right, it's also recited in the Lutheran Church, and it's the exact same thing. But it professes the Trinity. The Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, as they put it, are all one and the same. Just three different beings. Okay, this pagan Alexandrian computation for the setting of Easter is, according to Collier's encyclopedia here, shows that Easter, the church feast which commemorates the resurrection of Jesus Christ, is considered the most ancient and most important festival of the Christian year. Prior to the time of Pope Victor I, the Western churches, as a rule, kept Easter on the first day of the week, while many of the Eastern churches, conforming to the Jewish rule, observed it on the 14th of the month of Nisan. Through the energetic efforts of Pope Victor, the latter practice gradually disappeared. Okay, you see the separation there. They wanted nothing in common with Yahweh. They wanted nothing to do with the laws of Yahweh. So they were pushing that out. They wanted to practice the gods, serving the gods. And it says, but another problem came to the fore. Granted that Easter was kept on Sunday, how was that Sunday determined? The Council of Nicaea 325 paved the way for the final settlement by ruling that Easter is to be observed by all on the same Sunday. That must be the Sunday following the 14th day of the Paschal moon, and that moon was to be according to the Paschal moon, whose 14th day followed the vernal equinox. Okay, so you see this mixture of righteousness and evil, right? You see the 14 days, but what's it 14 days after? They're counting it 14 days after the vernal equinox. Well, how is the vernal equinox determined? It's the position of the sun. This ties right into sun worship. How does Yahweh tell us to set the first moon? How do we set the first moon? By the observing of the green ears of barley. That's correct. Praise Yahweh. And then we look for the first moon after that, and that is what determines that first moon. Now, Yahweh, in nowhere does he tell us that we're to set the feast according to the sun. But everything is all done according to the visual sighting of the green ears of barley, and then after that is the visual sighting of the moon. Does the moon always appear the same time every month? Does it always appear exactly 28 days after the first moon comes up? Okay, we know 28 days later the moon's going to come up then again at that particular time. And then exactly 28 days later, is it going to come up again? It doesn't do that. It can come up a day early, it can come up on that day, it can come up a day late. It just depends. That's what makes us Yahweh's feast. Yahweh knows, Yahweh sets the appointed time when the moon is going to become visible. Okay, it's his feast. He ordains it. He sets it. That's what makes it Yahweh's feast. And when we keep these things and observe these things in the way that Yahweh instructs us to, then, those are Yahweh's feasts. When we deviate from that and do it a better way, as Constantine did, well, we'll just calculate it from the vernal equinox. It's all the same. No, it isn't. Because you're being disobedient to Yahweh. This was actually being done when they did this. This wasn't in obedience to Yahweh, but this was being done in obedience to the gods. And the whole world today has no idea who or what they're following. when they're following these things. We do. Yahweh's called us out of that. And Yahweh has shown us Yahweh has shown us these things. It's amazing. It really is amazing what Yahweh has done for us. Now, the Catholic Church's justification for using the vernal equinox to set their dates for Easter Sunday, which the Protestant churches have accepted completely, comes from the Council of Nicaea in the year 325 of this Common Era, saying, and this is what Constantine was saying here, he says, "And truly, in the first place, it seems to everyone a most unworthy thing that we should follow the custom of the Jews in the celebration of this most holy solemnity. Those who, polluted wretches, have stained their hands with a nefarious crime, are justly blinded in their minds. It is fit, therefore, that rejecting the practice of this people, we should perpetuate to all future ages the celebration of this rite in a more legitimate order, which we have kept from the first day of our Lord's Passion," he says, "even to the present times. Let us have nothing in common with the most hostile rabble of the Jews." And that was from the Council of Nicaea. That was from the Council of Nicaea on page 52. Now, the Council of Nicaea on page 23 then says, "Easter Day was fixed on the Sunday immediately following the full moon, which was nearest after the vernal equinox, because it is certain that our Savior rose from the dead on that Sunday, which next succeeds the Passover of the Jews." It says, according to the calculations adopted at the Council of Nicaea, which are still in effect, every Christian church and assembly in this world, if the Passover ever fell on a Sunday, Easter would be the following Sunday, so as to have nothing in common with the Jews. And you can look at that. You look on the calendar. If Passover ever falls on a Sunday, you can bet that Easter is going to be the following Sunday. It'll either be before it or after it, but it'll never be on the same date. Pastor makes a comment here. He says, it was not the Jews that were being rejected. They weren't being rejected. Constantine and his followers were rejecting the laws that these people obeyed. They were rejecting Yahweh's laws, which established each of the feasts that he had ordained. Okay, does that sound familiar? Remember what took place back in 1 Samuel chapter 8? Remember, that's when Samuel's son rose up and the elders, they rose up and told Samuel, we want a judge. We want you to appoint a king to rule over us, because your sons don't walk in your ways. So appoint us a king who will lead us in our battles, who will guide us and direct us. And remember, when Samuel went to Yahweh, what did Yahweh tell him? He said, Samuel, these people haven't rejected you. They've rejected me, that I should not rule over them. It's the same thing. There's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new under the sun. It was not the Jews that was being rejected. It was Yahweh's laws. It was Yahweh's perfect righteous character that they want nothing in common with. They also have nothing in common with the ordinances or the laws of Yahweh. Therefore, because Christianity has nothing in common with Yahweh and his feasts, it has everything in common with paganism and its holidays. Remember Romans 6:16? Don't you know that to whom you yield yourselves as servants to obey his servants, you are whom you obey? They've rejected Yahweh. Do they belong to Yahweh? Who do they belong to? They belong to Satan, absolutely. This fact is documented from the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible, Abingdon Press, Nashville, Tennessee, 1962. It says the Church Week and Year. The development of the church calendar was a remarkably slow process in Christianity, and equally striking in fact that so little of the Jewish year finally found a place in Christian celebrations. Okay? Where we should have expected a Christian transformation of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Purim, etc., we find only the retention of the Paschal festival. This is due to the fact that the church year was largely the creation of the Gentile church. And the background of such notable days as Christmas, Epiphany, Ember, etc. is pagan, not Jewish. We must, however, suppose that the earliest Christians continued to observe, he says, the Jewish year, and we can tell the break with the synagogue was complete, of definitely Christian days distinct from those of Judaism. The New Testament affords us only one certain example, that of Sunday, and this was observed as the day of the Lord's resurrection. Well, we know through simple math, 3 days and 3 nights, we know the Messiah, we know Yahshua was not resurrected on Sunday morning. Okay, so we know that. We know that from the simple math, 3 days and 3 nights. Okay, the world says the churches say that Jesus Christ, or the Messiah, their Messiah, was placed in the grave right before sunset on Friday night and rose Sunday morning. Well, 3 days and 3 nights. I don't care how you work it. I don't care how you crunch the numbers. You're not going to get 3 days and 3 nights out of that time period. It's impossible. You can't do it. But yet Yahshua said that would be the only sign that he would be the true Messiah. So the pagan worship of Easter, on page 116, reading from Compton's Pictured Encyclopedia, we find that Easter is the greatest festival of all the Christian church, which commemorates the resurrection, here it says, of Jesus Christ, which festival was named after the Anglo-Saxon goddess of spring. So notice who it was named after. It was named after the goddess of spring. Easter, it says, the greatest festival of the Christian church, commemorates the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is a movable feast. That is, it's not always held on the same date. The Church Council of Nicaea, AD 325, decided that Easter should be celebrated on the first Sunday after the first full moon, on or after the vernal equinox, March 21st. Easter can come as early as March 22nd or as late as April 25th. The name Easter comes from the ancient Anglo-Saxon goddess of spring, Easter, it's all pronounced Easter, in whose honor an annual spring festival was held. Some of our Easter customs have come from this and other pre-Christian festivals. And then an Unger's Bible Dictionary shows here, it says Easter. It says the word Easter is of Saxon origin, the goddess of spring, in whose honor the sacrifices were offered about the Passover time of each year. And then Pastor writes here on the bottom of page 116, he says, it's a fully documented historical fact that the day which was chosen by the Christian church to celebrate this resurrection was a day that had been celebrated by pagans from antiquity. It was celebrated long before the birth of Yahshua, long before the birth of the Messiah. And it says, yes, the only difference between these two celebrations is the fact that the name was changed to veneer it with Christian respectability. All they did, they changed the name. The following pages of this chapter will prove these statements beyond any shadow of a doubt. Beyond any shadow of a doubt. Now, what does Yahweh say about taking these pagan customs and changing them so they're respectable, and then if this is done, can that be used? Can those things then be used to honor him, to honor Yahweh, if we just change the name of these things? Will he accept that? Is that something that Yahweh will accept? Absolutely not. No, he will not. Deuteronomy 12, 29 to 32 says, when Yahweh your Father cuts off the nations from in front of you and you displace them and live in their land, be careful, is the warning. He says, be careful not to be ensnared into following them by asking about their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? I will do the same. Verse 31, you must not worship your Yahweh your Father in their way. You see the admonition there. He says it very clearly in very plain words. There's no misunderstanding this. You must not worship Yahweh your Father in their way, for every abomination to Yahweh which he hates, they have done to their gods, or Elohim. They even burn their sons and daughters in the fire as sacrifices to their gods, or to their Elohim. Whatsoever I command you, be careful to observe and do it. You shall not add to it, nor shall you take away from it. Now, let me see if I want to go into this here. Nah. Okay. So, Yahweh will not, this is not something that can be done. We cannot take, Yahweh is not going to honor a celebration to him that was done in honor of the gods. It simply can't be done. He will not honor it. Yahweh tells us how we can honor him, how we can reverence him. And he spells it out for us in his 613 laws. It's very simple. Pastor shows here, he says, it's simply no secret that Easter originated with the worship of pagan goddesses. The fact is presented almost every time one researches the word Easter. Reading about this pre-Christian spring festivals from Funk and Wagnall's Standard Reference Encyclopedia. Now, some of this might sound like it's a little repetition, but the thing is, look at where these are coming from. These are coming from different sources, okay? And they're all saying the same. They're all saying the same thing. It says, although Easter is a Christian festival, it embodies traditions of an ancient time antedating the rise of Christianity. In other words, it came before the rise of Christianity. The origin of its name is lost in the dim past. No, not really. It was kind of hidden, but it hasn't been lost. It says, some scholars believe it is probably derived from Easter, Anglo-Saxon name of a Teutonic goddess of spring infertility. Notice what it is. It's a goddess of fertility, to whom was dedicated Easter, corresponding to April. Her festival was celebrated on the day of the vernal equinox. Okay, notice the dates. Look when these things are being celebrated. On the vernal equinox. And the traditions associated with the festival survive in the familiar Easter bunny, the symbol of the fertile rabbit, and the equally familiar colored Easter eggs originally painted with gray hues to represent the sunlight of spring. It says, such festivals and myths and legends which explain their origin abound in ancient religions. The Greek myth of the return of the earth goddess Demeter, who has a Roman counterpart by the name of Ceres, from the underworld to the light of day, symbolizing the resurrection of life in the spring. After the long hibernation of winter, had its counterpart among many others in the Latin legend of Ceres and Persephone. These words are killing me here. The Phrygians believe that their all-powered deity went to sleep at that time of the winter solstice, and they performed ceremonies at the spring equinox to awaken him with music and dancing. The universality. Okay, remember, Catholic means universal. The universality of such festivals and myths among ancient peoples has led some scholars to interpret the resurrection of Christ as a mystical and exalted variant of fertility myths. Okay, this mystery. You see this mystery religion here. Reading on page 103, The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop, it says, Easter and Ishtar are the same. Then look at Easter. What means the term Easter itself? It is not a Christian name. It bears a Chaldean origin on its very forehead. Easter is nothing else than Astarte, as one of the titles of Beltis, the Queen of Heaven. So Easter, this goddess here, this goddess Easter, and she goes by many other names. The title of Beltis is also known as the Queen of Heaven, whose name, as pronounced by the people of Nineveh, was evidently identical with that now in common use in this country. That name, as found by Layard on the Assyrian monuments, is Ishtar. Ishtar is pronounced Easter of Assyria, was worshipped, pastor shows here, in pagan authority during her spring festivals. Then Collier's Encyclopedia tells us a little bit more here about Ishtar. Now, Ishtar, or Easter, is known as the goddess of love and war. Okay, the goddess of love and war. The most important goddess of the Sumero-Akkadian pantheon. Her name in Sumerian is Inanna, which is the Lady of Heaven, the Queen of Heaven. And she was the sister of the sun god Shamash and the daughter of the moon god Sin. Ishtar was equated with the planet Venus. Okay, so here you've got this Ishtar, Easter, the goddess of love, is associated with the planet Venus. Her symbol, it was a star inscribed in a circle. As a goddess of war, she is often represented as sitting upon a lion. As a goddess of physical love, she was a patron of the temple prostitutes. Okay, she was the patron of the temple prostitutes as the goddess of physical love. She was also considered the merciful mother who intercedes. Boy, that should be sounding kind of familiar to us. The merciful mother who intercedes with the gods on behalf of her worshipers. What position does Mary hold in the Catholic Church today? The one who intercedes on behalf. She intercedes on behalf of the people so that her son definitely won't turn down her requests. It says, throughout the Mesopotamian history, she was worshipped under various names in many cities. One of the chief centers of her cult was Uruk. Astarte of Phoenicia was an offshoot. So now you got Ishtar, now you've got Astarte. Was an offshoot of Ishtar of Assyria. To the Hebrews, this abomination, pastor says, was known as Ashtoreth. Ashtoreth is a plural, the plural of the Hebrew Ashtoreth, of the Phoenician Canaanite goddess Astarte, deity of fertilization, reproduction, and war. Okay, the use of the plural form probably indicates a general designation for collective female deities of the Canaanites, just as the plural Balaam refers to different male deities. And then this information here about Ashtoreth from the International Bible Encyclopedia says that Ashtoreth was a goddess of Canaan and Phoenicia, whose name and cult were derived from Babylonia. So there is, we'll attempt this here again. That is a picture of a carving or an engraving of Ishtar, who is also known as Ashtoreth, who is also known as Easter, who is also known as Astarte. Okay, and it shows here that she was. You can see down here. Look down here at the bottom here. You can see how, she's many times pictured standing on lions. Well, there you are. There's those two lions that are standing right there. Okay, so the goddess of Canaan and Phoenicia, whose name and cult were derived from Babylonia, where Ishtar represented the evening and morning stars and was accordingly androgynous in origin. Under Semitic influence, however, she became solely female. So androgynous means neither male or female, right? You could take on male term, could make on a female, whatever suited that being at the time. But, however, under Semitic influence, she became solely female, although retaining a trace of her original character by standing on equal footing with male divinities. From Babylonia, the worship of the goddess was carried to the Semites of the West. The cult of the Greek Aphrodite in Cyprus was borrowed from that of Ashtoreth. And in Babylonia and Assyria, Ishtar was the goddess of love and war. Again, you see these two terms, the goddess of love and war. An old Babylonian legend relates how the descent of Ishtar into Hades in search of her dead husband Tammuz was followed by the cessation of marriage and birth in both earth and in heaven. It says, other goddesses of Babylonia, who were little more than reflections of a god, tended to merge into Ishtar, who thus became a type of the female divinity, a personification of the productive principle in nature, and more especially the mother and creatress of mankind. So the mother of mankind is what she became. In Babylonia, Ishtar was identified with Venus. Like Venus, Ishtar was the goddess of erotic love and fertility. I don't know why they say erotic love. Why don't just call it what it is and just call it lust? Okay, because that's what it all boiled down to. It says her chief seat of worship was Erech, where prostitution was practiced in her name, and she was served with immortal rites by bands of men and women. Okay, so she was served by both men and women. In Assyria, where the warlike sides of the goddess were predominant, no such rites seem to have been practiced. Okay, so reading on from page 412 and 413, we see Ashtoreth. Ashtoreth, Astarte. Let me see if I've got a different one in here. Nope, not yet. That's still the same. Still the same one there. Okay. But on page 412 and 413 of Unger's Bible Dictionary, we find this information about Ashtoreth and Astarte. It says, Astarte, a Canaanite goddess. The name is cognate with Babylonian Ishtar, the goddess of sensual love, maternity, and fertility. Licentious worship was conducted in honor of her. Okay, so now we see this licentious worship was conducted in honor of her, as Asherah and Anat of Rosh Shamara, where she was the patroness of war as well as sex, and is sometimes identified with these goddesses. Okay, on page 413 of Unger's Bible Dictionary, we have found that Astarte is the Greek name for the Hebrew word Ashtoreth. Okay, and then we find that Astarte Ashtoreth is merely the Semitic Ishtar, which we have already learned is pronounced Easter. So Astarte is the Phoenician goddess of fertility and erotic love. The Greek name was derived from Semitic Ishtar, or Easter, and is the goddess of fertility. Egyptian iconography, however, portrayed Astarte in her role as a warlike goddess massacring mankind, young and old. In Ephesus, from primitive times, this goddess had been called Diana. So now we have another name that she's known as, is Diana, and who was worshipped as the goddess of virginity and motherhood. So can you see now how all of these things are all coming together? These different attitudes, these different characteristics of these different goddesses are merging together in what the Catholic Church refers to as Mary. Okay, the goddess of virginity and motherhood. How she intercedes on behalf of, intercedes on the gods. I mean, you can see these things, and even the as we'll get into, and I don't think we're going to make it tonight, but as we do get into it a little bit more, you're going to see the similarities between the actual statues of these different goddesses to the actual, to the statues that are around the United States and around the world of Mother Mary. I mean, the exact same thing. Standing on an egg, hands outstretched. The whole bit. When you really look at it, it's amazing that what's hidden right there in plain sight. But it shows here this goddess of virginity and motherhood was called Diana, and she was said to represent the generative powers of nature, and was pictured with many breasts. It shows. It says a tower-shaped crown symbolizing the Tower of Babylon adorned her head. So we do have a picture of that one. We do have a picture of Diana and what she was looking like. And that is a picture of Diana. Okay, you can see the tower. You can see the tower, how that Tower of Babel, that Tower of Babel there, you see that on her head? All these other things, it's just, these are pictures, actual statues and inscriptions that are out here and that are out here and abound. There was another book. There was a book, and it talks about this. It talks a little bit here. The name of the book is called Babylon Mystery Religion, and what we're beginning to see here is the origins here of mother-son worship. And again, this is something else that is actually being seen and is shown through. As Mary, the Mary and Jesus, the statues of Mary and Jesus and the pictures of Mary and Jesus. It all has its origins here in this cycle, in this worship here. But the Babylon Mystery Religion, pages 16 to 17, kind of gives us a little bit of information here. And it says, one of the best examples of such a carryover from paganism may be seen in the way of professing the professing church allowed the worship of the Great Mother to continue, only in a slightly different form and with a new name. You see, many pagans has been drafted into Christianity, and we've seen that. We've gone through and we've seen several instances here of how these different things have been drawn into, from paganism has been transformed into modern religion. It says, but so strong were the pagans' adoration for the mother goddess, they did not want to forsake her. Compromising church leaders saw that if they could find some similarity with the worship of the mother goddess, and they could greatly increase their numbers, but who was it that could replace the great mother of paganism? Okay, and remember, this is what Constantine did. Remember, he allowed these different traditions to come in, and he was bringing everybody in under one universal religion. But who could do that? It was Mary, of course. The mother of Jesus was the most logical person for them to choose. Why then couldn't they allow the people to continue their prayers and devotion to a mother goddess and only call by the name of Mary instead of the former names by which she was known? Apparently, this was the reasoning employed for this is exactly what happened, they said. It says, little by little, the worship that had been associated with the pagan mother was transformed to Mary. And little bit by little bit, we see the same thing with these different traditions. The different traditions with the Easter eggs and the Easter bunnies, and all of these other things. They slowly became they became engrafted in. Now it shows here that this goddess was worshipped in Ephesus. Well, it was not until the time of Constantine, the early part of the 4th century, that anyone began to look to Mary as a goddess. Even at that period, such worship was frowned upon by the church, as was evident in the words of Epiphanes, it looks like, who denounced certain ones and elsewhere for worshiping Mary as a goddess and offering cakes at her shrine. And we'll get into that here, Yahweh willing. I don't think it's going to be today, but probably next week. She should be held in honor, but it said, "Let no one adore about Mary." Yet, within just a few more years, Mary worship was not only condoned by what was known today as the Catholic Church, it became an official doctrine at the Council of Ephesus in 431. So it was actually ordered. It was actually ordered that Mary worship be brought in, and that took place again in the Council of Ephesus in 431. But the original goddess, Semiramis of Babylon, on page 121 here, it says, the worship of Ishtar or Easter, move that over here again, spread throughout the ancient pagan world where she was venerated in almost every segment of society. The original of this goddess, however, loomed upon the historical scene in Babylon. From the 2 Babylons by Alexander Hislop on page 20 and 22, we find this information about the original of this great mother goddess, Semiramis. The Babylonians and their popular religion supremely worshipped a goddess mother and a son who was represented in pictures and images as an infant child in his mother's arms. In Egypt, the mother and child were worshipped under the names Isis and Osiris. In India, even to this day, as Isi and Eswara. In Asia, as Sibyl and Dionysus. In pagan Rome, as Fortuna and Jupiter Pure, or Jupiter the boy. In Greece, as Ceres, the great mother, with the babe at her breast, or as Irene in the goddess of peace, with the boy Plutus in her arms. And even in Tibet and China and Japan, the Jesuit missionaries were astonished to find the counterpart of Madonna and her child as devoutly worshipped as in Papal Rome itself. Xingmu, the Holy Mother in China, being represented with the child in her arms and a glory around her, exactly as if a Roman Catholic artist had been employed to set her up. So in here we can see some of these different things that were being talked about, different variations of this mother-son, this mother-son worship. says the original of that mother, so widely worshipped, there is reason to believe she was Semiramis, the great goddess mother. It was from her son, however, that she derived all her glory and her claim to deification. Okay, does that sound familiar? The same thing is taking place with the one that is worshipped as Mary today. That son, though represented as a child in his mother's arms, was a person of great stature and immense bodily powers, as well as the most fascinating manners. In Scripture, he is referred to under the name of Tammuz, but he is commonly known among classical writers under the name of Bacchus, that is, the lamented one. To the ordinary reader, the name Bacchus suggests nothing more than revelry and drunkenness, but is now well known that amid all the abominations that attended, amid all the abominations that attended his orgies, their grand design was professedly the purification of souls, and that from the guilt and defilement of sin. The lamented one, exhibited and adored as a little child in his mother's arms, seems in point of fact to have been the husband of Semiramis, whose name, Ninus, by which he is commonly known in classical history, literally signified the son. As Semiramis, the wife was worshipped as Rhea, whose grand distinguishing character was that of the great goddess mother. The conjunction with her husband under the name of Ninus, or the son, was sufficient to originate the peculiar worship of the mother and son, so extensively diffused among the nations of antiquity, that Ninus is sometimes called the husband and sometimes the son of Semiramis. So, again, you can see here this one here, this is the Babylonian goddess of Semiramis. This one here shows the Indian goddess. And then there's another version of that same Indian goddess, and then the Egyptian goddess of Isis and Horus, and then the Roman Catholic Mary and the God incarnate Jesus, and then here you see the goddess there of Diana of Ephesus. It says, the Babylonian worship of the Great Mother spread throughout the known world. This mother goddess was known by different names, but the form of her religion has not transformed since her antiquity. In other words, the religion itself hasn't changed. The name by which she was known has changed, but not the religion itself. It says the Layman's Bible Encyclopedia here tells us this facts about Easter. It says, Easter, an annual celebration observed by much of the Christian church commemorating Christ's resurrection. Modern observance of Easter represents a convergence of three traditions: the Hebrew Passover, the Christian commemoration of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, and the Norse Easter, from which the name Easter is derived, a pagan festival of spring which fell at the vernal equinox on March 21st. It says prominent symbols in the celebration of the resurrection of nature after the winter were rabbits, signifying signifying some type of fertility here, and eggs colored like the rays of the returning sun, and the northern lights, or aurora borealis. So now we see the Easter egg. Easter eggs have absolutely nothing to do with the resurrection of the Messiah. You ask somebody, what does that have to do with the resurrection of the Messiah? They have no idea, because it doesn't have anything to do with it. It doesn't have anything to do with the resurrection of the Messiah and the 3 nights in the grave after he was placed there. But the egg was a sacred symbol to the Babylonians. An egg of wondrous size fell from heaven into the Euphrates River. From the egg, the goddess Astarte, or Easter, was hatched. From the land of Babylon, humanity was scattered to the various parts of the earth with these religious people. They took the symbol of the mystic sacred egg. Each pagan nation had its own representation of this wonder, and the Greeks had their sacred egg of Heliopolis, the Typhon's egg. So there you see here on the top of the page here, you see 2 representations of the egg. Now from the 2 Babylons, we're going to learn about this mystic egg of Astarte, or Easter. It says, from Egypt, these sacred eggs can be distinctly traced to the banks of the Euphrates River. The classic poets are full of the fable of the mystic egg of the Babylonians. And thus its tale is told by Hyginus the Egyptian, the learned keeper of the Palestine Library at Rome in the time of Augustus, who was skilled in all wisdom of his native country. An egg of wondrous size is said to have fallen from heaven into the river Euphrates. The fishes rolled it to a bank. So this huge egg fell from the sky, landed in the river, and the fish rolled it to the bank, where the doves, having settled upon it, hatched it. And out came Venus, who afterwards was called the Syrian goddess, that is, Astarte. Hence the egg became one of the symbols of Astarte or Easter. Okay, so that's where the Easter egg comes from. If anybody ever asks, now you know. Okay, the Roman Catholic Church has their own official representation of Ishtar, the Virgin Mother, who stands atop this sacred egg of Heliopolis with the serpent Typhon at her feet. This official pagan representation is now modernly known as the Virgin Mary. And I don't know if I have that one. I don't know if I put that one in here. No. I don't think I did. Oh yeah, I did. Right here. Okay, this is the official pagan representation known as the Virgin Mary, and you can see here the. Oh, come on. Kind of hard. It's kind of hard to see here. I'll move it up this way here, but you can see she's standing on this. She's standing on the egg, with this moon representation down here, and down here at the bottom of your feet, her feet. You see the serpent down there? His tongue sticking out, and up here toward the top. Up here toward the top, you see the crown that she has there, and look at the position of her hands. Her hands are positioned out like this, just welcome. Just these welcoming arms. Who can resist these welcoming arms? Just come on as you are. Come worship me, and everything will be all right. And that's basically what she's doing there. She's beckoning people, trying to get people to come into her fold, so to speak. But that's some of the representation there that we see, and these are very common things. You see them in many religious books. I mean, you can see them in, like I said, if you ever go by a devout Catholic's house, a devout Catholic will have a statue of Mary sitting out in their front yard. I mean, they will have it there. I've actually seen them, and I'm not lying when I say this. I've actually seen them with a statue of Mary like that. And in order to make a shrine, they've actually taken the base of a toilet and they put it in the ground. And so now they have this nice little covering to go over their statue to protect their statue. I'm serious. I mean, I've seen it. I've seen it more than once. Let's put it that way. But anyway, men, it is 8:00, and we will go ahead and we'll leave off here on page 124 at the top here. These Ishtar fertility hairs. So we're going to get a little bit more about the origin next week, about the origin of this Easter bunny, and some more about the other traditions concerning Easter, and start getting into other deceptions concerning some of these pagan holidays that are out there and their origins and how they have their roots deep in devil worship.